Let's get straight to the point. If you are a fan of ARPGs, you have no doubt sunk multiple thousands of hours into games like Last Epoch, Path of Exiles, Diablo, Grim Dawn, and much more. So when a game like Hellclock shows up, an ARPG that skips the spreadsheet phase and throws you straight into the action with eye-catching visuals, it's hard not to take notice. You're not going to find that 300-hour grind here. No need for a PhD in Path of Exology, just you, your build, and the tense time restrictions, or far from me to say that you can't enjoy a nice softcore playstyle with no timer and no fear of dying and losing your entire save file. I poured 20 hours into Hellclock and beat it almost 100%. But if you know me, you know that I tear through ARPGs just to get to the mind-melting, screen-freezing chaos where every click is a dopamine hit. I'm not here to nod off in my chair grinding through another 5 hours of storyline fluff. I want to break the game, and I want to do it now. I want everything to explode, not soak up damage like a sponge. So let's talk about Hellclock, what it does right, where it stumbles, and why, despite its flaws, I still had a damn good time playing through its linear progression. I mentioned this during a previous Nextfest, but Hellclock's story is set in the late 1800s during the War of Canudos, touching on the Brazilian Republic and social conflict. I'm not that big of a fan of storytelling in ARPGs. Ambient dialogue and environmental cues are usually enough. Since I thought the game was fully voiced in Portuguese, I was not aware of the options to choose English. I didn't figure this out until I stopped playing after I beat the game, so I had to read the subtitles, which did not work out for me. I just like to skip through most of the dialogue, and this game didn't change that format in the slightest. I'd like to use Path of Exiles as an example, because I've skipped all of its dialogue too, but the story still came through. Malachi was conducting experiments on the exiles sent to the island, corrupting them in his efforts to create the gem system. As the story escalated, the gods entered the conflict, allowing the player to take them on directly. Once the Atlas emerged as the central threat, the player character spiraled into increasingly dangerous levels of power that they eventually had to be sealed away inside of the Atlas. Eventually, the seal was later broken, reopening the conflict, showcasing just how corrupted and vile these player characters had become, overwhelmed by the endless grind to become more powerful than the universe itself. This was great writing. Even without reading any of the lore directly, the story remained coherent, even if I'm still missing pieces of the dialogue. Hellclock didn't quite achieve that. Maybe if there was a language prompt at launch, it would have made things a bit easier, but as it stands, jumping into a fully voiced story in Portuguese without a choice for players who prefer English storytelling feels silly. This simple setting at the start of the game could have gone a long way in making the experience more accessible. While story usually isn't the main draw for games like this, what really stands out in Hellclock is the visual style. It's like taking Hades and removing the cel-shaded styles and turning Path of Exiles into a linear experience. At first, that might make it feel limited, like there's not much going on, but let me stop you there. This is not Path of Exiles, and it's not trying to be Path of Exiles. It is a linear ARPG that cuts straight to giving you what you want: visual, eye candy, and mindless gameplay. There's very little farming unless you're chasing the best in-slot uniques or trying to max out a specific ability, aura, or spell. You can mix and match as much as you would expect. It definitely feels more open, but still limited compared to being socket-starved as an Elementor juggling summons in Path of Exiles, but there's still room to experiment. Personally, when I looked at all the builds, I wanted to run a high mobility double knife build that offered 5% lifesteal on damage dealt, which as you can see, was absurd against the final base game boss, where as a hardcore player, it was getting pretty dicey, while spamming the bell spell with a high cooldown with minion effects spawning in between. But without the right relics and gears, I would have ended up completely mana starved and dying, because this boss was no joke. This doesn't really change until you start unlocking features like Hell Mode and the Constellation Tree. Personally, I didn't feel drawn to other playstyles because this is what was breaking my screen. But that is where Hell Mode forces you to play something different. Hell Mode is essentially the same game, but stripped down. The drops are worse, enemies hit harder, gold is scarce, resistances are cut, and your power feels gutted. It's like playing Path of Exiles and having Brutal Mode flipped on, resetting your progress and all of your items, and then throwing in a whole new skill tree instead of its classic version. You feel weaker and stronger at the same time, and you're only given 7 attempts to ascend again. Since this is a progression-based game, multiple runs are required to do any meaningful damage. Once you hit this roadblock, your options narrow. Either grind out a sponge of a boss until the timer runs down, or, if you freeze time, slowly make your way through the scaling content until you eventually die or burn 20 minutes on a singular target. That's when the cracks start to show. The game encourages this experimentation, but eventually you will hit a ceiling that feels both restrictive and unavoidable. Hellclock features two separate skill trees. The first is simple: kill monsters, collect souls, level up, and invest your points in the bonuses like health, damage, or drop rates through the bell in the cabin. Once you defeat the final boss and return to town, you are given two options: farm the constellations for passive upgrades and effects like the Fury stacks, or ascend into Hell mode. This is where the game took a negative turn for me, and this could be attributed to the fact that this is an unfinished mode that is still in beta access. Ascension into Hell mode resets your progress to 0, but does not visually confirm this to you. All of your items are stripped, and you are granted constellation points along with access to new skill trees. I assumed that it would be a standard ARPG power-up climb, start over but stronger, with tougher enemies to match. Instead, it was a hard reset after 20 hours of progress, not a clean new game plus, just starting from scratch with more difficult debuffs, which I suppose was meant for those that are into the hardcore aspects of restriction. I was not into that. As a hardcore Dead is Dead player, somebody who plays the game until they die and then they stop playing completely until a new league or season gets released, this system did not sit well with me. When I finally died and saw my items and entire gameplay state erased when I had nothing to lose in the first place, I kinda lost interest in continuing. But that's the whole point of playing hardcore Dead is Dead. This is how I approach these games. I dive in hard for a few days or a week and then move on, but resetting everything after that much time felt more punishing than rewarding because I genuinely thought I lost everything twice. Keeping players stronger while ramping up the difficulty would have created a much better long-term loop. Since this is again still beta and is susceptible to change, there is a possibility that it will be better in the future. Once again, this is a system that is trying to encourage you to build what you find rather than forcing any particular playstyle. This is because of the 7-run restriction. Let's move on to some issues with these features. First off, the game itself runs fine. There are no major bugs or crashes to speak of, but there is an issue with loading screens being a pain. It takes longer than expected to load in and out of every run, which interrupts the flow and pulls you out of the action more than it should. And we can't forget about how linear the gameplay actually is. Each run, each room, each boss fight ranges from mediocre to forgettable. Not even the train station bosses offer a slight improvement. It doesn't matter if you're playing through Act 1, Act 2, or Act 3. They all feel the same. Most bosses and enemies leap around, stand stationary, throw out damage over time circles, and act so generic that you can often just stand still and chip away at them without much risk. And if you have a high sustain and conviction build, there's not much that these monsters can do to you. The only real threat came from the AoE fields that seemed to pierce your conviction shields and deal damage directly. This was the only thing able to kill me if I wasn't hitting a target. Boss fights should test your skill, not your patience, as you hold down 2 keys, yawn for a moment as you're up against a boss standing around with a bunch of AoE attacks and minions. It made me want to do anything but fight them. In fact, I was scrolling through my phone while fighting this boss in particular. I ended up just running around farming a bunch of cursed shrines for the consolation points until the dopamine hits wore off and the boredom set in. I want to really like Hellclock, and I do to a degree. It still feels like there needs to be some rebalance or redesigning of bosses instead of these features being restricted to Hell mode, where they gain more movesets and speed modifiers based on what choices you have chosen as your debuffs. As it currently stands, I really do like the game, but it just needs a lot more changes. What you'll find in Hellclock is the type of gameplay that a lot of people want to get to but rarely get without sinking hundreds and hundreds of hours into something like Diablo or Path of Exiles, that pure, mindless, one-button carnage. With the screen lighting up with particle effects, the frame rate dipping, enemies vanishing, and explosions, or scale into sponges until you re-gear or just get at it. And on top of that, the loot raining down run after run. It's exhilarating and only takes about 2 hours to achieve this initially, and a few more to max out if you're lucky with the drops. You'll have to leave your current run to equip any new relics, but weapons and gear are automatically equipped the moment you find them. So really it's about getting lucky, finding that one drop that gives you the damage spike or extra mitigation needed to keep pushing forward. The more monsters you kill, the more coins and levels you gain, which in turn turns it into an ARPG with roguelike elements, where you can modify your skills and powers to become stronger. If you run through each encounter and kill nothing, you will end up weaker, but as you continue to push through the higher levels and the timer restriction while re-gearing each run, it becomes progressively easier to manage as you get stronger. If you're somebody who enjoys that constant dopamine rush of flashing visual effects, fast pacing, and linear repetitive gameplay, especially if you've got that ADHD brain itch, it's fantastic. And I suppose if you're into Brazilian storytelling, it might have something there for you too. You're looking at about 20 to 25 hours before things start feeling stale. Even if you switch your build up, you'll need to re-gear from scratch, and since you cannot recycle your trashed equipment or any of your gear, it turns into a bit of a time sink. Still, for what it is, Hellclock delivers a solid, fast-paced ARPG experience. Just do not expect it to last forever or to be overly complex. There's a lot of flexibility here if you want it. You can mix constellations around to tailor your builds, and Hell Mode does a good job of forcing you to try something new whether you want to or not. I prefer to one-trick, and even with that in mind, I was pretty satisfied with the experience. Hellclock might not have that long-term depth, but for the fast, flashy, no-frills ARPG fix, it delivers exactly what it promises and matches the price range that you would expect.